I think the first step to self mastery is self, and that's understanding who you are.
Hello and welcome to the Mindset and Self Mastery Show. I'm your host, Nick McGowan. Today on the show, we have Jeristotle Wells. Jeristotle, what's up, man?
Hey man, how you doing? It's exciting to be on the show. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it as well. Hey, why don't you get us kicked off? Tell us what you do for a living and what's one thing most people don't know about you that's maybe a little odd or bizarre.
Awesome. So my name is Jeristotle. I'm a hip hop artist. I like music that helps motivate people to achieve their own version of greatness. I'm also a digital marketer by profession, build websites, all that fun stuff. And one thing people don't know about me is I think that there's a mathematical equation to the entire universe, but I think that we're too stupid to figure it
So eloquently put. Um,
out.
Man, I'd said to you like literally moments ago that part of the reason why I asked this first question is to have something cool come up, but also it can sometimes just take us down the path for the entire episode. Um, as soon as you're talking about that, my brain instantly jumps to Fibonacci and just how mathematics ties into everything. Now, growing up, I didn't like math, and I thank God that I have an iPhone that can help me do all the math. It's like basically Texas Instruments in my hand at all times that can make phone calls and help me listen to music. Um, but I'm right there with you. And it's interesting to see how there's sacred geometry and there's all these things that go into it. But let's actually dive into that a little bit more. What got you to that point of being able to understand that and see that? And why are you so excited and infatuated with it?
I think the deep one, I was really big into math as a kid. I think like I understand numbers better than people
Oh,
a lot
okay.
of times because people aren't very like logical, right? Numbers are logical. That one plus one is two, person plus
Yeah.
person is elephant sometimes. I don't know why, it just is, right? So I think that just as I dive into numbers and the understanding of people and the understanding of like how to build things, it just always kind of goes back to math, and you can find like patterns in things being done consistently correctly. And I think that just experiences in life have made me really, maybe it's more of a want than a truth, right? It's like I feel that that would make the most sense, is if there was something that was tying this all together and not this random collision of things that just happens to not fall apart. Like to me, that doesn't make sense, right? So I feel like there has to be some kind of unifying force that keeps everything from literally flying apart at the seams.
Yeah. Are you faith driven? You agnostic? Where do you kind of land on all that?
I kind of zoom out on that a little bit. I think that religion is a game of telephone, and I also think that it's kind of like language. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like if I had this, I used to work for the government for a little while, and I had this guy, he worked for the government and he was also a pastor. And he was like, we went out to lunch and he's just like, talking about religion and think about religion. And I'm like, well, I just have a question for you. Like, if I was born in China and I never had the opportunity to hear, Christian values or Jesus's name, and then I died, would I go to hell? Because like if I would, that doesn't seem very fair. Like I didn't even know, So like that's kind of for me, I think religion's very localized. It's like, but I think it's an attempt to get to the same thing. Like I think religions kind of talk in similar ways, like the peculiarities and the particular rules and whatever's are different and the stories are different, but I think everybody's kind of trying to get to the same thing, explaining the unexplainable and trying to teach people how to live like a good life is kind of the summary of like every religion.
Yeah, there's the system of religion, and I'm right there with you, where it's like that's the system, and there are probably people that are going to listen to this and crack the hell up. Some others might gasp and be like, "Oh my god,
Yeah.
fuck you both," or whatever. But in all
Yeah.
reality, let's take a step back to where you said people were stupid, um,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
mean, really, I'm trying to be as most non-judgmental as possible and full candidacy, I spent about 10 years playing lead guitar in worship bands for churches
Nice.
and being on the
Yeah.
back end of things and having conversations. I remember even saying to some people at church, I'm like, yeah, well, every once in a while I'll smoke some pot and then practice the music for this. And they're like, oh my God, what do you mean? I'm
How
like,
dare
well,
you?
how the fuck do you
Yeah.
think I figured out that finger part, the tapping part? Like, that
Yeah.
wasn't a normal situation. Um,
Right.
but also like the religion of it and the system of it that says these rules and all these judgments go together is not what the universe is actually made of. It's a human construct to be able to go, well,
Yeah.
let's put it in a box so that we can all figure this thing out. And I've asked
Yeah.
that question before. I've had people ask me that question too. Like, I did missions trips before to like Russia and some other places. And they're like, well, what if we never heard about Jesus? Would we just die and go to hell? I'm like, it's
Yeah.
a solid question. I don't really know the answer to that. I don't think
Yeah.
any of us
Yeah.
will, and like,
Right.
I'm sure I'm sure there are people that say 100% yes, and there are also people that say 100% no, but nobody actually knows. So if we just remove the religious side of it, because that's a system, that's just a system that people need to feel comfort in, and it's kind of like a gateway into it. It can be for some people. For you to be
Right.
able to say there has to be some rhyme or reason to all of this, you're trying to put logic. And I love the idea of 1 + 1 = 2, but human plus human equals elephant. Like, totally makes sense. Um,
Yeah.
but I'm right there with you that it's much deeper than any sort of system or religion or anything like that. There's more to it when it comes to the math. Now, if you've done a lot more of the research and have actually worked with this sort of stuff, I'd be interested in knowing like what you found with that, because I've seen different people talk about even the quadrivium and trivium, like reading, writing, arithmetic, and then how earth or space and time and music kind of ties into everything. But there's math
Right.
within all of that. I mean, even as a basic
Exactly.
musician, the amount of times you're thinking like, fucking drummer, just stick to the pocket, 2 and 4, dude, come on,
Right.
2 and 4.
Right.
But how is that related to what you do and the research that you found? How does that tie into basically how you live life?
I mean, to be honest, I really think I intuit a lot of things. I do read a lot of things, a lot of philosophy. I love math, but I also take things that I've learned and try to run it through my own intuition because I really think that the vision that people have and the experiences that people have are unique to themselves. Like, I think that we all see a different color blue. You know what I mean? We all agree that it's blue, but the blue that I'm seeing isn't the blue that you're seeing. Like, our lenses are all different, right? And I think that if we kind of like, again, zoom out a little bit, there's a string theory concept of the universe. I think that that goes down to the string theory concept of a person playing guitar. I think those things are more connected than we know, and like the vibrations of the guitar create the sound, and the vibrations of sound, I think that kind of is the vibration of the universe creates all of the things that we see and exist. I saw something on, maybe it was social media, maybe I heard somebody say it in a speech. It all runs together these days, but that like matter is just the speed at which something is moving, right? So like water is water in a liquid form, but gas is a sped up version of water. So it looks differently just based on the frequency or the vibration. So it changes based on the vibration. So I'm just like, it's all, again, like you were saying, it's all math at a certain point, but what is the math? We haven't come up with it yet?
Yeah. I mean, even thinking about it with that, like we're trying to find a base level to subscribe to. Like, uh, you could tell me that 1 + 1 = 2, and we all agree with that. But that's because we all agree that one is only one. And you put two of those ones together and you get two of those. So we all agree to that. It's almost like money and currency. People say, well, this thing costs X amount of dollars, and we know the dollar to cost whatever. And I mean, we could probably go different path with that because it's not actually based on gold at this point. Fucking Biden's just like, just
Right.
print it off, send it
It's
out, whatever
fine.
we need. Yeah, pull out that magic
Zero
printer.
repercussions. Yeah.
But we all subscribe to that. And then from there, we can build upon it. And I haven't really thought about this, but even with math, like, who's to say that that math is off? Because we all subscribe to that. Like, again, I think as a musician, as a drummer and a bassist, they need to be in step with each other. But the guitar needs to hear the the 2 and the 4 and understand to bounce off the snare or whatever it is, but we all subscribe to it's 1, 2, 3, 4, or 3, 5, or whatever we're doing. You know what I mean? Um, but where does that actually come from that we all then subscribe to that to say, well, this is what happens from here? Because I do agree that math is a major factor to everything, like the sacred geometry, the Fibonacci sequence, all of those things. But, and I don't know, maybe this isn't where this conversation really goes, but now I'm just thinking about that of like, well, who's to say that it is or it isn't, you know?
So there's some things that we've talked about in this conversation so far that we've pointed out as social construct, but I would go far and say what isn't a social construct? Like, you know what I mean? Like
Touche.
gravity.
Yeah,
Gravity, we can start there, but like beyond that, and even okay, gravity, you call it gravity, boom, we're on here, but go far enough outside of the atmosphere and gravity no longer applies. So like, you know what I mean? What rule is absolute? I don't know if rules are absolute. They really depend on their environment and their situation and their social construct. So it's
sure.
like I think, and one of my favorite quotes, I really love quotes, is like when Steve Jobs is like, just understand that every rule that you listen to was created by somebody who's no smarter than you. Like that just breaks it down for me every time. You know, it's like, you know, when you're trying to do something, there are rules like don't do anything that's going to send you to prison. I live by that rule,
Sure.
right? Everything else is up for debate, you know what I mean? Like from that, like, and then just like, how do you create from that point versus like, well, everybody said it, it's this. It's like, you know, start from like, you know, like don't do bad things that are going to get you in trouble for a long period of time and try to do the best possible thing you can for the world and then combine your ideas and then operate in that system, not like, you know, speed limits and such, you know.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
yeah.
I think that ties back to religion and everything else too. I think like the core basis of it is simple. Just don't be a dick. Just
Yeah.
simple. Just don't.
Literally
Just
start
throughout
there. And
yeah, throughout
and
life.
I think some people just like, okay, I'm like super religious, but like I'm also a dick. Like, and I'm like, well,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like
It
that
doesn't
doesn't,
make
I think you're kind
sense.
of missing the point, you know?
I've actually said to some people pretty recently too, like if Jesus was here, the brown man he was would be really pissed. He's not a
Yeah.
blonde haired, blue eyed dude from
Yeah. It's
like
like, what
fucking
they got it
Boston or
wrong.
something. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. They're like, who is this? But he'd be like, no, this isn't what I was talking about. And all the rest of us
Yeah.
are all kind of the same. Uh,
It's like if Jesus actually returned, would anybody listen to him? Like, like, like real life,
Jeez,
real Jesus. Like,
for
would everybody be
real.
like, ah, shut up, you don't know what you're talking about. Get out of here. Like, I'm
Uh,
Jesus.
it's
It's like,
like,
no,
yeah, we've
Jesus.
heard
Like,
that
seriously.
before.
Yeah, whatever.
Must have thought the same thing back then. Like, yeah, I believe he
Yeah,
was a real
seriously.
person. He came here. He's like, no, I
Yeah,
swear I'm the son of God. They're
yeah.
like,
No,
okay,
seriously. Oh, okay.
sure.
Sounds good. Yeah,
Yeah.
whatever.
It's like, I swear to God, watch. This dude's dead. Here he comes. Wait a minute. He's
Yeah,
on to
yeah.
something here.
I don't
Um,
know. We gotta get it. We gotta get rid of that guy. He knows
yeah.
too much. Like,
Fucking string him up.
like what the fuck? Yeah, no.
Jeez.
It's like it's crazy.
Uh, well, I'm glad that we got into the math and some of the system stuff here. But one of the big reasons why I wanted to bring you on was to talk about music and creativity and how music ties into what we as people do. Now, there's probably a good portion of people listen to this podcast that either are musicians, have been musicians at some point, or at least just love music. I do find it interesting when people are like, "I don't know how to play music, and I don't like music at all." I feel like they may have body parts in a freezer somewhere, but to each their own. So I'm assuming that everybody has some affinity for music, if not a deep love for it. Like you and I'm sure we could hear things and like, oh my God, do you feel how that fits with this? And like it just hits straight to our soul. But we're all creative. Even the people that don't think they're creative, they're sometimes creative problem solvers and they're thinking outside of the box. As musicians, we can look at that and we can use the instruments to be able to make things and create things from there and then just stack things upon other things. And like, think about how many times you probably played with that keyboard in the back or some MIDI attached to it and you start to layer things to it. You walk away, you come back with fresh ears and you layer different things. You add a different progression over it and it becomes something totally different than the original idea. I think that happens within life as well, where people say, well, I want this thing to happen. And then life happens the way it does. but they'll sometimes get really pissed off about it or upset. From a musician's
Yeah.
perspective, if we start off with an idea, like I have tracks that I've been working on that the idea is maybe a small hint of it, but what it's become is something so vastly different. And that's the beautiful progression of it. What are your thoughts of all that?
Yeah, that's really awesome. So there's a couple of different concepts. I read this book called Big Magic, and it kind of treated creativity as this mystical energy that comes through people, like people are radio towers, right? And a part in the book, it was like Michael Jackson would often wake up and call his producer at like 3 o'clock in the morning and be like, I have an idea for this song, we have to make it right now, we have to make it. And he's like, guys, like, Mike, it's 3 o'clock in the morning. He's like, if I don't make it right now, Prince is gonna make it, you know. And like I always treat it like also when you people have had those ideas of like they see something on TV that's like a product and like, oh, I thought of that 2 years ago, I should have made that. I think that ideas bounce to people, and like, hey, do you want to do this idea? And if they don't do it, the idea goes to somebody else. It just bounces around. So the idea is this energy that wants to be born. I think that that's a concept. And I heard Jay-Z say this in some documentary, and he's like, whenever any real creative, he's like, we know that we're just whistles and the wind blows through us and songs come out. And I'm like, man, that's like
Cool.
super deep. Like
Yeah.
it's like we're the I guess it's kind of like a radio tower. It's like we are musicians and artists are in tune enough to something that doesn't exist that wants to be born. And I think the universe kind of works like that. And this gets a little mystical, I guess, but I think that we are the physical expression of the universe as people and humans. So like things that don't exist, whatever plane or dimension that is on, comes through us as humans, and we birth things into physical existence. It kind of goes back to that concept of like vibration, things at a different frequency, like if you just go from water to steam. But if you take that on another bigger level, like radio waves, we can't see radio waves, but they exist, right? You know, so I think things can be kind of interpreted at that level. Obviously, we get to the point of where we can't understand what we're talking about anymore because we don't have anything to like tangibly capture it. But I think that we know atoms exist, but we can't see those either. Like, you know, there's things that exist that we don't necessarily understand, but if we take things that we do understand, we might be able to extrapolate that and apply it in a reasonable way. And I don't know, I really do feel that as a creative, a lot of times when I'm really just in the process, I'll create things and be like, where did that come from? Like where did that even like dream? Where did dreams come from? I don't know. Like
Yeah.
it's just like where did that it impresses me sometimes, and I don't necessarily. I think when I got good at being a creative is when I didn't take ownership of all my creations. Like when I let go of the it's me part and be like, I'm just here to try to make stuff that's cool, man. And like got more there. There's more freedom in it. And like when I was like, oh, me, like, oh, this is representing myself and what are people gonna think about it and all that. It's so stifling. Like you're putting yourself in this like box, like, and you like it's hard to be in that box and be creative at the same time because like you're kind of like stifling your creativity. It's like those are opposite energies. They're not the same, right? So I think if you're just like receptive and like my goal is to make something that's super cool, super unique, super authentic, and you follow your feelings through the creative process, like I feel like your feelings are kind of like a compass in general, not just with creativity, that point you in the right direction. So I like to take that understanding and apply it to the creative process where like if I feel like this is where this should go, then it's where it should go. Like the end result is the end result. And how people take it is how people take it. That's not my job. My job is to create the thing. Like I think there's like consumers and there's creators, and we each play each role. But as a creator, your job is to create, not interpret the reception of the consumer. Like that's their job. Be a critic. That how I made something. What do you think? that's your job. That's not my job to do anything about what you think. That's on you. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah, that I mean that spans life. It can be that's a lesson for all of us to be able to actually dive deeper into. That can be really hard to um, keep in our hands because just life happens and you move along, you're doing these things. But especially from a musician standpoint, I remember there was a time where I was in a band in Philly where we were starting to get big and blowing up, and I could feel ego coming up, but then going like, there's pressure to keep creating, to keep putting out things that are better than what were put out before, instead of just taking a step back and saying like, let it just come out and let it just create. And when you start to actually step away from it, like I actually need to step away for a handful of years to be able to go, okay, now I can just create. And when I create at this point, I'm right there with you where there's some things like, and I had kind of alluded to it. I'll start off with a riff of something, and then like 6 months later, I go, how did this even start? Where
yeah.
did all of this come from? And
Yeah,
it doesn't
yeah.
matter what other people think about it. We get to be able to do us. But the life lesson with this is that it's purpose. It ties into our purpose, and it's how we
Mm,
actually relate to this world and what we do. I think in some ways social media has really fucked us up.
mm.
Technology is supposed to be helpful, but we as simple humans at times will just grab that thing. Like there are a lot of people that go, well, these creators make all this money and do all these things and look at them. We don't know actually what happens on the back end of all that stuff. Even the curated shit, when somebody's got a camera following them around, you only see what they want you to see. You don't see the full process. And you also don't need to see that because you just need to watch your own process and work through your own stuff and do your own things. But sometimes that creative piece of us that wants to come out just gets, like you're saying, stifled because we feel like we have to do it in a certain way, which ties into, I think, capitalism and us wanting to make money and us wanting to have a significant impact. So, how do you actually move through life that way, knowing that you may have a significant impact, but you may also not with that one specific song or that one specific thing you're creating? And how do you keep that as top of mind as you move throughout each day?
So when I was in college is when I first started making music. And to date myself, this is when that Soldier Boy came out. I can't even remember I can't remember how it goes. But that Superman, that song, yeah, that dun, 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 dun. At the time before SoundCloud, there was something called SoundClick. And me and my friend used to release our music on there and we're like, oh, this is cool. And then he's like, listen to this song. It was like number one in the United States or something. It hadn't like popped yet. And I listened to it and I was like, this is the dumbest song I've ever heard in my life. Nobody will ever like this song. I don't understand how it's so popular right now. And then like 3 months later, it was everywhere. Absolutely everywhere. At that point, I'm like, I don't know what's popular. I will never know what's popular. So I'm just going to take that off the table. And my job is just to make things and let the world do with it what they may. So like that was my like lesson in humbling myself of being like, I don't know. And I think the more that you think about it, the more you screw it up. Like honestly, is like if you're like, man, like I really like, is this gonna be like the more you do that, you're digging yourself a hole and you're gonna be like, okay, now it's time to create, and now you're in a hole. You're like, I gotta climb out of this hole. So like, don't do any of that. And I think the stuff that hits the most is the authentic stuff, the real stuff. And that's the stuff that you didn't dig yourself in a hole about, right? So I think the key is authenticity, not as a catchphrase, but as a human relating to other humans. Remember, there is a phone. You're on a phone or a computer. I'm on a phone and computer. There's miles apart. We're still two humans connecting.
Yeah.
And that's the part that I think people miss about everything in life these days when it comes to social media. It's social media. Social. They miss the social part. So I think when people, if you connect, if you have any friends, start there in real life, not internet friends, in real life, and they stay around you and they don't just like run away from you, do what you do with them on a digital format. Like be that person. Be the person that connects with those people, and you can connect with more people online. But don't aim at like your behavior to maximize your connections because now you're a fake person. So I think like really is just like be who you are. I think it just start there. If more people could just be that and understand that that person's a good person, that's why you have some friends. That's why you have good conversations. Like that's the person that you need to be. And if you and here's the other thing. Numbers, why is 1 million followers good? Like if you're trying to do anything, if you have 1,000, I don't know if you've ever heard the
Oh
1,000 true
yeah,
fan
1,000
theory.
rule. Yeah.
If you have 1,000, that's plenty. That's amazing. Like, so I think people really need to think smaller when it comes to these things online. Like, if like people are like, man, my post only got 60 likes, it's like, if there were 60 people listening to you in the audience, you'd freak out. Like, that's okay. That's great. Like, you're doing great. 60 is not a small number. You know what I mean? So I think like the 1 million likes, the 1 million follows, the numbers have been skewed online when in reality if you take that and put it into a real life context, that's 50s is a solid showing. So I think people need to kind of like remove the digital veneer off of things and bring it to a real life context and understand that the impact that they're making with their posts that get 10 likes or 50 likes or they go viral and get 1,000, 10,000 likes, that's massive. You know what I mean? Like just bring the scale down and understand that your impact doesn't need to be in the millions. It can be in the tens, and that's a solid thing. I try to tell myself every time I'm doing anything, if it impacts one person in a positive way, it was worth doing. That's enough for me. And that's huge. And that goes with like the butterfly effect and things of that nature. A little ripple creates another ripple. Like you change somebody's day, make in a positive way, they change somebody else's day. That person changes somebody else's day. Like the small things we do are actually huge things. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and we've been going through social media a lot within at least this little bit of the conversation. And it doesn't always have to be about social media. It's wherever you are to be able to impact whoever you are, but from your own perspective and not just doing it for other people. Like I see the people um, that'll make videos at times that are just like clearly trying to do something to help somebody, but it's not. It's a selfish thing. And that's one of the reasons why I mainly stepped off social media. At this point, I basically hop onto Facebook Marketplace to see if somebody's selling dad's old cards from the closet or something. I'm like, I'll pick up a couple 100 cards, or like
Yeah.
who got the newest Victor Wembanyama rookie card or something like that. But everybody that's trying to actually get those numbers, they're trying to get numbers instead of just being themselves. And there's a massive difference between trying and just flat out being. I'm really glad you brought up the 1,000 fan rule. I don't remember where I heard it, but I think it was from Reverb Nation many,
Mm,
many years ago in some book with that. And the thing that stood out to me was not the 1,000, it was the 150. Because once you hit that 150 mark of core fans, those people start to fold over. And that's where you get to that 1,000. But you still ultimately have between 50 to 150 like raving fans at that point. So even anything you do, if you get to that point with that, like right now, I'm right there in the same spot. Like if I think we have a few thousand listeners on average that listen to each episode of the podcast, which is cool. I've had some people go, "Holy shit, man, that's a lot." I've had other people go, "Yeah, well, Rogan does this." I'm like, I don't give a fuck what Rogan does. I really don't.
right.
If one
Yeah.
person listens to anything we talk about and asks themselves different questions or says, oh, fuck, maybe I should look at this a little differently, we may never know that. They might email and be like, oh my God, you guys changed my life. But I don't expect that. And if somebody wants to send that, great. It's not like going to be like, fuck you. I would appreciate those sort of things, but I don't
Yeah.
ever expect that. I expect that if it lands for people, how it lands, that they then go do something with it, and there's no real need for it to be otherwise known. Like I think the people that are like, well, I made all this money and I need a library named after me and I need this and need that,
Yeah.
it's like, fuck that. I'd rather be the
Yeah.
multimillionaire that walks around in a hoodie. No one fucking has any idea. Like, don't give me a
Yeah.
fucking library, put that to better use, get people off the streets, do something like that. But being able to make that one little change from the trying to do something to us being something, it sounded like that was a pivotal moment for you. where you
Yep.
realize that at one point, and you probably have one of those duh, oh fuck, and what the hell have I been doing sort of situations. Is that about right?
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
So, can you recall that moment or at least that season of time where you started to actually shift away from I'm going to stop trying and start just being and moving in the direction that you are today?
To be honest, man, it's like I feel like a lot of things are transitions over time, and then there's that certain moment that hits you. I feel like when I was younger creating, it was more about me. It was more about the results. Like, oh, I can make this cool music. Oh, maybe I can obtain this by doing this. And I had a very big around my 30s. I had a explosion of life, we can call it a volcanic eruption of life, where like everything in my life caught on fire. So me and my best friend, we were making music for a number of years. We opened up for Pusha T in Washington DC. Things were going great. Like we had a lot of like people that were interested in our music saying keep doing what you're doing for another year, you're going to explode, like people that were in the industry. And then boom, his he had a wife, or he had a kid with his future wife, and then he had to decide, what am I going to do with life? And then so we tried to keep doing music, and he had a lot of the external pressures, family, wife being like, what are you doing with this music thing? We need you to do something more serious. You need to take life more seriously. And that's why I think one of my biggest things is being able to make creativity a real job. That's one of my driving core principles of life, is like I would love if creativity was considered a real job, not like, oh, you need to have a real job to do this. So, we ended up breaking up the group. We didn't break up the group, we fizzled out, and he had to focus on other things. I had to focus on other things. And we just stopped doing shows, stopped creating music. We still played around back and forth, but it wasn't like a pursuit for the future, right? It wasn't something we were building anymore. So that fizzled out. Um, I was a freelance web developer for a while. I had a really big contract that was feeding everything I was doing. That fizzled out. I had a long-term relationship. And when the music fizzled out, then the relationship didn't look as shiny because I didn't have my outlet, right? I didn't have the thing that I was super passionate about. The relationship was good, but I had gotten into it when I was really young, so I had grown a lot in that process. We kind of grew apart, so all three of those things happened at the same time, basically, in the same year. And that was a humbling experience, to say the least. I call it the valley of despair in my lifetime. Like, so all those things happened, and I was just like, what am I gonna do with my life exactly? And I think that I'm a logical person. I had it all planned out logically, but what they say, like, life is what happens when you're busy making plans. So life happened. I realized that my plans aren't infallible. That was my first real loss, and there were multiple losses, right? Like before that, small setbacks, small things here and there. But that's when I realized that like things happen beyond your control, and the more you attempt to control them, the more you take yourself off of your path a little bit. So it's like the river of, I really like Buddhism philosophies and things of that nature because they teach you kind of how to be in the river of life, not try to control the river of life kind of thing. And then from there is when I really kind of like, and this was like I was probably like 32. I really just like let go of everything. And I was like, I guess this is funny. Like the whole let go and let God thing, I guess. Like whatever you, God, universe, whatever you want to call it. I think it was like, okay, like this is beyond my control. I accept that fact, and then I kind of just started floating a little bit more through life of like, okay, what do I want to do now? I was like, well, I don't know what I want to do, but I think it'd be cool if I, traveled a little bit. Okay, so I traveled with that flow. My friends hit me up. I had done some web development, some digital marketing. I launched a watch company on Indiegogo, Kickstarter kind of company. So I had done that. So my friends were like, "Hey, man, we saw what you were doing online. We're going to start a food truck. Like, would you want to help us do that?" I'm like, "Sure, why not?" went with that flow. Went out, floated from Virginia down to Corpus Christi, Texas, and I was like, yeah, sure, this sounds cool. Let's try this out. So we did that. Worked with some friends, had fun. It was awesome. Had a food truck. We won a couple of like awards with the food truck, and I was like, this is cool. But in that time, like, look, this is retrospectively. In that time, I was still in the valley of despair. I didn't know what I wanted out of life, where I was going. Like all the things that I knew were, smoldering in ashes from a year ago. And so I'm just kind of like going with it, following my feelings and my passions and my things that really interested me, and just going with that. And from there, the food truck became a restaurant. We opened up a restaurant. And then in that restaurant, we were like, man, we love, like, the group of us loved music. So, yeah, let's get some musicians in here. So we started throwing music back in there. And then, like, oh, I got to network with musicians, hang out with them more. And then that's kind of what ended up sparking back my interest in pursuing music. And I ended up doing it independently because I never really considered myself as an independent artist. I always did it with other people and in a group. And I was like, well, what if I tried to do it myself? What would that look like? Could I even do that? And that's what kind of brought me full circle back to my creative passion of making music. And it was that journey of letting go and following the flow and surrounding myself with a community of people who were on that same wavelength, on that same energy that really wanted to do cool things creatively, that literally brought me back to my path of creativity and music. So it was the letting go that got me to where I wanted to go, not me forcing the situation, which like I learned that yesterday. you know. you know.
Oh man, I love that. It's hard to not think that the people that are so um stringent and just like, well, this is what my 5 and my 10 and my 25-year plan looks like. Like I've seen life just unfold in beautiful ways. There's been chaos and different valleys of despair and all that, but for all those things to happen are to make you land where you're at now, which all the things you continue to flow with will then help you land somewhere else. What the fuck? If you tried to plan all of that,
Yeah,
that
I would
doesn't
never
make
I
any
would never
sense.
have been I would never have been able. I think that sometimes our plans limit us,
Yeah.
not, you know what I mean? I feel like we, again,
Yeah.
with the box, we're like, we're gonna do this, we're gonna do that and that, and then opportunities come, you're like, no, 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 no. It's not part of my plan. It's like there's another parable. I love parables too, apparently. Where like there's a guy drowning and it's like somebody a small raft comes by and he's like, "Don't worry, God will save me. It's
Yeah.
fine." And he's like, and again, and then no,
A
it's a bigger ship comes
helicopter
and
and
another one
yeah.
comes. He's like, "Don't worry, God will save you." Then the guy drowns and the guy's like, I sent you three different. I tried to help you. You just,
Yeah.
I think that's very similar to what we're talking about. Is like you have to keep your aperture. Let's call it aperture. You have to keep your aperture open to see the opportunities that are coming your way, and don't be so stringent on your plans because you might be like not being open to something that might be even better than what you're planning.
Yeah. I think some people, especially people that listen to this, can appreciate the intuitive side of it. I'm very intuitive. I'm very emotional. So I can feel those things start to come up and I'll go, oh, they're trying to tell me something. And the intuition will
Yeah.
lead me in one direction or the other. And sometimes I get like the total ick feeling, or I'm like, cool, I'm not going to go that
Hmm.
fucking route. Or they like
Yeah.
jump out of my skin. But whether we call intuition or just trust in your gut, I think there's that feeling and that direction that we can take from that if we allow ourselves to do that without being stuck in those boxes of just, well,
Yeah.
this is what this has to look like. I remember people being like, by the time I'm whatever age, I'm going to be married and then I'm going to have multiple kids. I'll have a business and I'll do this and do that. I remember thinking some of that bullshit before and then like being like, all right, well, I had businesses and I wanted to kill myself. I got a
Hmm.
divorce and life is so much fucking better than it's ever been. But it's been
Yep.
a lot to go through. And
Yep.
if we just stuck to those boxes, that's where we would stay and we wouldn't actually get out and do the things that we just don't know are out there yet. So, man, I appreciate you getting into everything you've gotten into with all that you've gone through and all the stuff that we've talked about. What's your advice for somebody that's on their path towards self mastery?
I think the first step to self mastery is self, and that's understanding who you are, being aware of who you are, and maybe even going a step further and measuring yourself, measuring who you are, right? Like, so you might say you want to achieve these big goals in life. Are you taking steps towards that? You know what I mean? Are you doing things of that caliber? So I think the first step in self mastery is really self awareness and focusing on that, because if you don't do that, you might end up mastering somebody else's life, not your own life. You know what I mean? So I really think you have to be aware of what you truly want. And when you say you want things, is that your voice, or is that society's voice, or is that your parents' voice? Like, whose voice is setting the goal? And I think a lot of times we get confused by that. And I understood that again when I was 30. I realized that I achieved all the goals that I had set when I was 15, and I hated my life. So whose goals were those goals? They obviously weren't mine, because if I set the goals, wouldn't I be happy that I achieved those goals? Wouldn't I enjoy my life, at that point? And then that's when I realized I was setting goals with logic, not my feelings. And I think your feelings are those things that drive you towards the thing that you're meant to have and meant to do. And if you don't listen to your feelings, and I think it takes practice to listen to your feelings over your logic sometimes. So if you don't practice that, that's like the root of self-awareness, is being aware of how you really feel about things.
Yeah, great way to put that. Look, I'm 160 plus episodes in, and I love asking this question to hear what different people think and what they say, but also to be able to look for patterns. And at around, I guess it was episode 100, I did like a summation. Like, this is everything that we've talked about and all of that. Self awareness is the biggest thing that has been the most patterned of all of it. Because you're right. Like, if we're not self aware, how can we be aware of anything else? And at the same time, I've found that the more self aware I am, the more fucking self aware I am. And the more aware you are of
It's
things, the more you're
punishing.
like,
It's
holy
punishing.
shit. Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Um,
not it's not roses. It's not self-awareness is not roses and skipping through, a dandelion field. It's very brutal. It's a very, very brutal thing. But that's the step that'll get you to where you want to go, because self-awareness is truth. That's what it is. You can use a different word. It's truth. It's like not lying to yourself, and you are the easiest person to lie to, regardless of what you think. It's so nice. It's fun. You built this whole imaginary world of greatness, and then you start measuring. You're like, oh, I'm full of shit. Oh, oops. You know what I mean? So like,
yeah.
I think that's very important.
Yeah. Good stuff, man. Well, look, it's been awesome having you
Yeah,
on
for
here.
sure.
Before I let you go, where can people find you and where can they connect with you?
Awesome. Everything on socials is at It's Jeristotle, and Jeristotle.com is where you can go to listen to some of my music and connect with me a little deeper if you want to dive down the rabbit hole.
Awesome. Again, man, thank you so much for being on with us today.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.